Right, okay. Good afternoon, it's Caroline Stevens. Welcome to Stepping Stones to Awareness. And I am going to be interviewing Dave Ellis. He's a military expert. Dave and I met 2 years ago and at a conference, the Bruges Group conference, I seem to recall, and we gave the politicians a bit of a run for their money. We gave them a really hard time, went for coffee afterwards, and we talked about military unification. And I also talked about the Canadian trade deals, which Jacob Rees-Mogg and Liam Fox and Bojo seem very keen on us putting on our parliamentary books. So I've been talking about CETA. Dave has been talking an awful lot about military union, and all the chickens are basically hatching at the minute. So when we met again a year ago, we were looking at a Veterans for Britain event. We saw Colonel Richard Kemp, Brigadier Julian Thompson, and they looked quite worried about the prospects of military unification with the EU. And so we launched our PESCO Gate campaign. There was Dave Ellis, myself, and my friend Carol Hellier, and the three of us with a network of people. We all wrote to our MPs and asked them what was going on. Were we going to be part of an EU army? And what do you think that the MPs said to us, eh, Dave? You've got to laugh about it now, haven't you, when you see what's been happening recently. I've got a letter here before we go on any further. This is from November 2017. And basically this came from Freddie Howe, Lord Freddie Howe. And he says, with regard to the relationship between our armed forces and the EU, I can assure your constituent that there is absolutely no question about the UK relinquishing sovereignty of our armed forces. It is important to understand that several member states, including the UK, have made it clear they do not support any idea of an EU army. There is no plan to establish one. That is dated the 27th of November 2017. Right, Dave, over to you.
Oh, crikey! Thanks, Caroline. Thanks for having me on your broadcast and trying to raise awareness with the general campaign. And thanks for calling me an expert as well. So I'll take that. I'll take that. Thank you very much. When we did that original mail shot to all the MPs, it was on the basis of concerns of PESCO. So that's the permanent structured cooperation mechanism that was generated at the EU end. So obviously there's a lot of interaction with our civil servants and ministers on that basis. And we were saying, well, look, this is all heading towards a direction that we don't really want to be in, all things considered, even with Brexit. And the very fact that the whole component of military union, military unification and military union, although now the Germans are calling it defence union, it effectively equates to the same thing. They need to unify the militaries to single point control, and that will enable their defence union. So I'm grateful that the Germans are now having this conversation out in the open, and that German government is actually tweeting about it. So we can talk about that in a minute because we've got a slide. But where we ended up with the campaign with our own MPs was that we were saying to them, well, we're not happy about this. If we're leaving, we can't really have our military being part of this. Otherwise, as a nation, we're not really going to leave, are we? That makes no sense. And what we got back, obviously, we found all these comments coming back that were pretty much a template letter, regardless of who the MP was, from a single point source. Now, that was somewhere either within the party or somewhere within government. But nonetheless, it does say in there in black and white, and I'm looking at one of the letters now, and it does say, and the key part is, of course, is that UK forces will not be part of any EU army. This particular letter is from Mark Pawsey MP. So that, of course, that's not true. That has now happened because we've got this lovely film clip now and the photographs of three para wearing EU insignia in an EU mission, an EU operation under EU command. There are other national militaries there as well, all in sort of squad format. So at some stage here, we're going to have to put the slides up so the viewers can see really what we're talking about. So it might be advantageous, Miles, if we sort of get them ready to put up so they can see
we have them ready in the order that you've specified.
So do you want to show the tweet from the German Foreign Office now?
Yeah, let's go.
Let's have a look at that one again.
Yeah, because then we can lead people through so they can see the picture and see the journey. So put the German government tweet up, and then we can talk about that.
So we're in the process of transforming the EU into a genuine security and defence union. We remain convinced that we need more and not less Europe.
Yeah, I mean, this is we captured that tweet a few weeks ago and pushed it around a few of the Brexit groups, and predominantly Veterans for Britain grabbed it and pushed it around, and it's pretty much gone viral now, because what it's done is it's blown the lid off something that you and I were talking about quite some time ago, despite the fact, even with all the lobbying that I'd done, MPs refused to look at it, acknowledge it, and got very, very squeamish when you mentioned the word military union or defence union or unification. They seemed to get very, very upset with this, despite the fact that we all know about currency union, and we've had sort of customs union, broad spectrum stuff. That's all sort of general in the public awareness. But since that tweet's gone out and everybody can see it in the flesh, that there is something, and all this stuff that we had with Nick Clegg, there are no plans and this is fantasy, it was an absolute nonsense. You and I knew it, Caroline, and a lot of other people knew it as well, that it wasn't a nonsense, because we'd done our research and people were talking about it decades ago. So for anybody that doesn't know, we've got source references going back to approximately 1942 mentioning military unification and military union. That's during the war. I'm borne out that source reference is now correct, because some decades on, the German government have decided to take what was probably an internal civil service pan-EU conversation, and it's now come out into the democratic interface, out into the open. So that conversation has moved from behind government closed doors now out into the public arena. I'm also borne out by that this is the case because in a meeting I had with Lord Tebbit a couple of years ago, when we were discussing military union and how that would impact on industry as well, because that's all included, all the defence industry goes in with the military, hand in glove, under the single point controlled concept. He said to me that Maggie Thatcher was asked a verbal request from Jacques Delors in 1984 for military union, along with currency union and loss of the national veto. So you can see the magnitude of importance. And this is something I've always struggled with. I can't understand how people can't see that this is really, really important. It's as important as currency union. There's a huge amount of money involved, a huge amount of business and capital and operational budgets. So now that German government tweet is out and it's gone viral, everybody's right, okay, well, we've got this thing, and really, what are they talking about? So they're talking there about a genuine defence union. All right, so we're interpreting genuine as meaning all in.
Yeah.
And for Britain, that means, obviously, we know it's about all defence services. So this is what I hope people will take on board. This is not just an army. This is a nasty EU propaganda myth. This is all defence services. So it's Navy, Marines, Royal Marines, Royal Navy, Royal Air Force, Paras, Special Air Services, Special Forces, all of it. It's all the defence services. Now, for the Royal Navy, that's a nuclear carrying navy. And the Germans, we've got quite a few sources now where Germans are absolutely saying, that this is part, that our nuclear deterrent and the French nuclear deterrent form part of the EU shield, as if it's already a fait accompli. So the genuine word in there is quite important. Now, they're also calling the conclusion of that commentary from the German government is more. And what we're seeing is that this thing was on rails, and it was a fait accompli that it was all going to happen. And what's happening now, of course, is there is some resistance developing in the Brexit camp. And we need to reach out to as many people as possible and the Remainers, because this is a key area that was denied during the campaign for both sides, or for the nation-led side, because obviously we don't want division. We want unity. We want Britain as a nation to come together and move forward. And the politicians need to do their job and get on with doing that. So I fundamentally believe everybody in Britain loves the Queen as a majority, likes the Queen and likes our armed forces. And this is something we can all get behind, because this thing is now got to be stopped. Otherwise, it's a fait accompli that what we've seen with the paras will escalate across all the services. Now, we've obviously been looking at EU NAVFOR for quite some time. So that's EU Navy. They've got several Twitter accounts, public interfaces. You can go and sift and search them if you want to look on Twitter, and they'll come up. And you can see what this thing called EU Navy is doing, EU NAVFOR. And it's the same model. It's, a few ships from this nation, that nation, like the troops are out now where the paras are in Sarajevo. It's, troops from here and there and all over Europe on a pan-EU level being put together under EU command. So they're unifying this, bringing together of militaries from here, there and everywhere, unifying them into single point command and control. And it'll be the same for the navies and so on and so forth. So this is the key message that we sort of get across, is that once this thing gathers momentum and they have a crisis of some sort, because the control centres that run and manage the EU military operations are designated crisis centres. And this is why we had a huge problem with David Cameron pre and during the Brexit campaign, that he was saying he would block any plans for an EU military HQ. But that was very interesting, actually, because there was one existing at Royal Navy Northwood nuclear HQ for quite some time.
Since 2002, because according to Wikipedia, from 2002 onwards, the EU itself has intervened 30 times into conflicts in 3 continents. So we have been working with them since 2002 anyway, as an EU army, have we?
Well, as military integration or military unification, they don't like to use the unity, units, union, unification or unify phraseology, because that's I think they've probably got quite serious problems doing that in government. So yes, it's been going on for quite a while. We had a tip-off from some of the senior, and I mean high-ranking naval officers, that this was so when we had the blow-up with Bob Stewart about, he was saying there was no EU military. I said, well, that's really interesting, Bob. So this was before Brexit, just at the point when Parliament voted to renew Trident. Well, that's awfully interesting, Bob, because you've got the former head of EU military staff now as Black Rod, David Leakey, Lieutenant General. And so if you're saying that the EU doesn't have military staff, why have they got a head of, what, they don't have military, why have they got a head of military staff? And he's photographs, all over the place. So it's not hard to find and prove that. So there was a lot of denial there amongst what was supposed to be stalwart military MPs that this was actually the case. The key thing we've all got to look at here is some of the cover words that are used so that all this washes through in policy and the background. Well, the big word is integrate. And we've just had, off the back of that German, capturing that German government tweet, another success with linking up with another group, where they've got some internal film clippage of RUSI. Now, we now know that RUSI, thanks to Dr. Lee Rotherham, is funded by the EU, and I think Brian Gerrish has been talking about this a lot as well. So,
what does RUSI stand for?
Royal United Services Institute. So this is a top government advisory group that's advising our government and ministers and the civil service of what they should and shouldn't be doing with our military and defence. And they're
funded by the EU and giving us advice.
And they're funded by the EU. So, go figure. And they've had a conversation at the Brexit point about the new framework for what's going to be in defence with the Brexit arena. And in the film clip are some pretty interesting parts, really. The first part is to do with the nuclear advisors talking openly about what's going to happen with our nuclear deterrent, and the language is just exquisite.
Dave, can I just interrupt, because I watched you speaking about the nuclear deterrent and how we join forces with France, because obviously we are the two nations that have the nuclear deterrent, and how our MPs had been voting earlier on as to whether we maintain Trident, but then they didn't vote to do it jointly with France, did they? Was this
No.
to do with the Sandhurst Treaty?
Yeah, I mean, it was more to do with the Franco-British. The principal work here was the Franco-British Council. And Brian Gerrish at the UK column has done most of the work researching all this. So what we had was behind closed doors, unminuted, at a jointly EU-funded charity, Franco-British Council, conducting major defence policy decisions and defence policy agreements with both nations to conjoin in a 50-year defence pact. So quite a long period. And this was obviously, you know, the first stuff was done in 2010 off the back of the Cameron and Osborne SDSR, which was the point when we had all these cuts, all right, where we had this lie propagated that there wasn't money, and they just took an axe to all the services and hacked them to the point where they could no longer operate as a national military. So my point all along with this, and this is at the point when we got started in 2010, so just a point of reference, I saw industry in the Midlands absolutely annihilated off the back of that so-called review. Hand in glove with that, then the military can't function, and when we can't make anything, basically all the companies that were making it have all just been annihilated. The bigger tier 1 and tier 2 companies were subcontracting to in order to get this stuff made. So all that's been annihilated, and then we have Admiral Sandy Woodward pop up in the paper and go, well, now we can't defend either end of the channel on the basis of what you've done. And I'll take his word. I can rely upon what that man would say. So it was at that point that I started to look, and you know, we formed the company and got going from that point of view. You know, alarm bells, everyone. There's something radically wrong going on here. So the Rusey stuff, where you've got Nick Whitney, a government nuclear advisor, with a long-established pedigree and a lineage going through the nuclear advisory offices to Sir Michael Quinlan and co. All this stuff's available on the internet. You can go and look at these people, you know, openly in that film clip that we've got. And we can probably do this in a subsequent where we can show the viewers that they're openly talking about it being extended into the EU in under a kind of a banner of Britain, France, EU, NATO, all the same blob. So all the, you know, it's just all one thing.
So this is basically coming from the Franco British
Franco-British
alliance.
So we've gone from being a nation. This is how the leapfrog and the stepping stones has sort of worked.
Yeah.
We've gone from being a national force. You know, we've had governments that have drawn down on it to such a degree where it can't function as a military, and it's in a dreadful state.
Yeah.
And we've gone into a bilateral arrangement with France, but actually now what those policy advisors are saying is, well, it could and should be extended into the EU. So they're viewing it all as just, it's already been unified in effect. It's already been unified into a single blob. We're not a national force anymore. You know, it's all just taken as read that this is just one big force of NATO, EU, French, British, everybody, and so on. You know, we don't see countries. We're not seeing countries. We're just seeing this big arrangement. And the key thing there was the integrate. Now, Beatrix Hauser there. We've got a photo of her. It's this lady at the lectern.
What number was that? Was number 8, wasn't it? I think
there's only one. There's only one slide there. You should be able to see it if you've got it.
Number 8, wasn't it? Yeah, we're just going to get number 8 up now.
And what we've got is this lady then says, you know, I need to tell you about this. I can't withhold this information. You know, she seems to be quite convinced and quite motivated to talk about this. And she then says that under the Clement Attlee government, and gives a specific date, January 1948, in a Cabinet Office document, that there's discussions taken up at the Cabinet Office, which is obviously what runs the government. That's the heart of it, the engine, that we should integrate with the EU, and this should be designated and tasked, and this should be the committees set up on this basis. Defence treaties should be arranged and organised, and it should be done under. So obviously we're now, how many decades on are we now seeing this? But under the strapline of integrate. So I want you to all just to concentrate on that for a moment, because we're seeing a lot of that word being used everywhere.
But I think it was unfortunate that the EU, or fortunate for the EU, that they kept on talking about structured cooperation, because people would turn around and say, no, you've got it wrong. It says cooperation, and we've cooperated with all these countries for many years. And I mean, at the Armed Forces Day, Armed Forces Day was not so long ago, and I went to an event in York as it happened, and I went to see the York Military Wives Choir with their little pop-up stand and talked to them about EU military integration. And they said, we don't know what you're talking about. Nobody seemed to know on the ground anything about this at all. No.
It's been completely done in the sort of submarine fashion. They come unseen. So we see a lot of these special words. I've focused on integrate here because it's relevant, because this lady speaks that this has actually been the case since 1948.
This is the lady. This is the lady now.
Beatrix Hauser, and she's sort of saying this is this was a fait accompli that we should, and the government was engaged on a Cabinet Office level. So all the machinery, the offices, the appointments, that offices would be made, appointments would be made on the basis of integrating with the EU since 1948. So there's one of your key words you've got to watch. If you see integration, basically that means unification. All right, unify, union, unit, single point control. Okay, and this is obviously, that meeting must have took place there, and some of the civil servants must have gone, I'm just hypothesizing now, some have gone, well, we can integrate, that's all right, but we can't unify. It was a well crafted word, because obviously that's a completely different arrangement. So this is something that's been busily going on in the heart of government since 1948. It's no wonder we're having all this trouble now, because if you think about it, all the elections we've had since then, and the referenda in 72, and the referenda just now, are irrelevant, because the heart of government was already set in motion to integrate. Doesn't matter what you vote, the machinery in government, in the Cabinet Office, is doing it.
But that's exactly, this is one of the examples I give, because people ask me for an interview and they say, are you concerned about having a second referendum? I said, well, is it really going to make that much difference? Because we're not getting Brexit now, and everybody's just sat there twiddling their thumbs and hoping and praying, but nothing's happening.
That's right, and this is why, because the heart of government, the machinery behind number 10 in Whitehall, is set and already designated for how many decades? This is 1948. This is 70 odd years to integrate with the EU. And it was done under 4 specific directives. Defence and security. So, as you and I well know, this was important, right? We're now borne out with that. Media and propaganda. So everyone, alarm bells. We need propaganda in order to do this, and media. Political, obviously, integration, but it was political union, but they couldn't say that, could they? Because they would have been unconstitutional. And economic. So the whole EU gambit that we saw that we're now seeing 70, 80 years on, was put into government in 1948. So the whole thing with Heath it was already fait accompli. It was like we'll have the rubber stamping exercise now in 72, because they'd already been beavering away with all this lot for how many decades? And we've now got another 50 years on that. So just going back to the point you made there about co-op, this is another special word that we see. Co-op, it's not a co-op. There's no cooperation. This is single point command and control. There's no co-op. Well, they might want you to think that there's a co-op, and it's nice and it's cozy and lovely, and of course it'll be cheap and it'll be more efficient and all the rest of it. Utter nonsense. This is about gaining command and control of our military. And let me assure everyone, there are no technical difficulties in doing this. There's a slide there, Miles, with a photo of CGRM.
What's CJRM?
Commandant General of the Royal Marines at joint, another one of these special words, joint headquarters at Northwood. And
Is
there's
that
a
them all
little
sat at the table?
Yeah, no. There's
No.
the photo there. Let me just get my email up. I'll do that and I'll carry on
Okay.
talking. So you've got a copy of a tweet there where I'm asking he was the officer in charge of EU NAVFOR at the time, and he very kindly confirmed what we'd been told.
Is that the one?
by
EUC3 Military HQ Director General.
That's it, yeah. And you've got a photograph of him there, stood in the doorway of joint headquarters. And there's a little conversation about this is an EU military C3. There are 4, one in Paris, one in Potsdam, and there's one in Greece. And he replies back, correct. And they're designated crisis centres, but they're not. They're actually military HQs. This is what I was saying about the David Cameron nonsense, is that we were saying to these guys, no, Cameron's vetoing nothing. This stuff already exists. It's already there. But we just couldn't get any traction with it. No media would take it up. Well, we now know why. So, we've got this dreadful state of affairs where, really the only instrument we've got is i.e. our MPs and Parliament. And regardless of party, I just want to, stop the whole party thing because, everybody sort of, when you knock a door when you're out campaigning and people answer the door and they go, go away, you're all the same. Sometimes they swear, but go away, you're all the same. Actually, the general public, the grand jury in this country are quite correct. They are.
Actually, that's an interesting point, Ashley, because you talk about the parties being defunct, that they're not fit for purpose.
No, that's right.
A lot of the parties have got a military slant to them, and
they like that because it makes them all cosy and we're all credible. So they'll go and recruit a few military bods, like they'll go and recruit a few doctors, nurses, policemen, firemen, bankers, whatever, and then it all looks cosy. But one of the best sources I had, so this guy's an ex-Trident account admiral, so it's one of the biggest accounts in government. It's a huge amount of money. And as an admiral, I'm very happy to rely on what this gentleman was telling me on the basis of all the other things that we discussed and were talking about and going through. And this bores out that the parties are a joke, a nonsense. Now,
actually, can I just say, Dave, what's interesting about, on Facebook, there's quite a lot of groups which are linked to veterans, and yet they still will not talk about EU military unification. Why do you think that is?
There seems to be it's like the nation's in denial about this.
It's been controlled, isn't it? Surely.
There's a lot of control. There's a lot of, we're not going to print that. We won't do an article on it. It's not what we want, or this stuff getting vetoed. We had, I'd say my big break in the Brexit campaign was the number 10 letter. The number 10 letter where all these admirals and generals were appended to a letter supporting staying in the EU, and these guys were not consulted. So we had that tip off and we turned the tables on them, and that's when Major General Julian Thompson, Admiral Roger Lane Knott, and one or two others, Jonathan Riley, Tim Cross, who told Cameron to bugger off and stuff like this. A few of them got motivated and got going. But at the time when this hadn't broke, so there wasn't an issue at all with this. It was still on rails behind closed doors with the civil service that military unification was taking place under the guise of integration and all this other soft words that they use like joint and co-op and whatnot. And they started to look. So then they started to look, and then they realised what was going on. So there is now some resistance, but the point I'm making, I'm not saying all MPs are bad, and I'm not saying all civil servants are bad. That would be, a gross misrepresentation. But what we've got predominantly is a system which, even if you were a good MP, Labour or Tory or Liberal, how do you get through the problem, which is, and this is where it reached the kind of wake-up call for me with this admiral, was that he went in to sign off a huge bundle of payments with the Treasury for the Navy that was multiple billions. So he goes in and he goes into the meeting and he said, and this is how it went. oh, hello, chit chat, nice pleasantries, welcome, come in. There's Bank of England people there and Chief Treasury people. So he's welcomed. It's very civil and nice. And right, okay, they'll be here in a minute. And so I'm thinking, just listen. It's all right. You'll get it. And in comes so everybody sat down at the table. In comes the Chief Conservative Whip and the Chief Labour Whip. So this is into the Treasury. All right. Now, bearing in mind, they camp predominantly, the whatever party's in. The Whip's office is next door to the Chancellor's office in Downing Street. So it's not much of a trip through the little corridor into the Treasury. So they come in. They're not looked at. They're not greeted. They're not, hello, whoever, how you doing? No, none of that. And what happened was, and this is how it was described to me, so we're not really looking at them. So the Treasury bloke's like, this is for you. This is for you. So 2 bits of paper. Off you go. And they were dismissed. So you can see how it works.
Yeah.
You can see where the instructions come from. So the whips tell the MPs what to do. They're pretty much running the job. So, but when you've got the focal point there of how our democratic interface actually reaches its point where it should be its most effective, is actually its most ineffective, because they're taking instructions from the Treasury. You go and do that. There's your script. That's your script. Off you go. You go and do that. That's your script. Right, toddle off. There was no pleasantries. There was no, because that end of the job, they hate them. They've no regard for them whatsoever. So obviously, there's a whip. They're actually an MP, but there's no report. There's no regard. Off you go. They were dismissed. So I can take it from that. And then, of course, the conversation. This is when the conversation got really good. Well, look, we're not giving you the money for this. So just, it's not happening. But there's a dialogue. Well, what do you mean? No. This has been agreed. Tony Blair's agreed it. We're not interested in what he says. You're not having the money. So do your worst. Well, I'll have a go. Well, if you want, go on then. And then, so this guy plays ping pong around Whitehall to try and get some money for the Royal Navy, for its frigates and, at the time, Harrier jump jets and stuff like that. And fair play to this admiral, and this is the point. He's an old school, pre-2000, when we had the step change. That's another one people want to look at. Step change in government with the civil servants. And got some of the money. Because obviously it's their job to get the money from the Treasury to go and do their job in the Navy or whatever. And it's sort of very similar to when Tony Benn fought the Treasury to get the money for Concorde. Up until this point, it was dead. And Tony Benn fought the Treasury to get the money for Concorde. So this is what should happen. But it isn't happening, because obviously the Admiralty now doesn't function as an Admiralty like we think it did in the Falklands under Fieldhouse and Henry Leach, where Henry Leach is knocking on Maggie's door going, you're not selling them ships. No, you can't do that. And knocking on the door and telling her. All right, so this isn't happening now, because all it's doing is integrating. The current stuff has gone so far since Tony Blair's step change in 2000 that now it's all on rails. We are integrating with the EU, and they all think it's a great idea. They don't see the fact that our military answers to Parliament, the democratic accountability. So this is the danger point, and there's been a lovely tweet today by Admiral Roger Lane Knott. You can find him on Twitter. Please support him. Get behind it. There's a tweet there where he's saying to a couple of politicians who are ministers, no, which is what Maggie said to Jacques Delors. This can't happen. You need to do something about it. We're making some progress, but we need to make more progress more quickly in greater numbers on this issue.
Well, I mean, for people listening to the show today, for some people, it'll be a revelation to them to think that our armed forces have fought through World War I, through World War II, and at the time World War II was actually taking place, we were actually planning to hand over a period of time, our military to Brussels.
I mean, it's not a we thing. We weren't doing that. These conversations were being taken on a far higher level, on a pan EU basis at a greater level than the democratic level. But I've seen source references discussing military union along with political union in roughly around 1942, in the middle of the war. So this is not, this is the difficulty. And obviously this is great because the amount of traction we've had over the last couple of weeks with the German tweet, this referencing coming from Rusi with the two experts there about the 1948 stuff going into cabinet, and the nuclear guy saying, could and should extend the nuclear deterrent into the EU as if it's just all fait accompli and seamless.
Do you think that this is just going to be the government just going to say it's just cost cutting? And of course, military wars have moved on to not just nuclear, but they're talking about drones. We're talking about other types of warfare, aren't we, now?
Yeah, I mean, the pitch is, you see, this is where, there was one of the big events industrially for this pan-EU unification industrially happened in 1957 with the Sandys white paper, where we took all these perfectly good companies like Hawker, Avro, de Havilland, and I could go on with quite a list. And we lumped them all into one thing, and we've now ended up with this one thing called BAE. And it's very vulnerable, because where we had these companies before that were making quick, timely goods that the RAF bought and used, and then we exported a lot of those planes all over the world, and people were busily engaged in factories all over Britain making this stuff, and everything worked fine. I think probably the pinnacle of that was the English Electric P1 Lightning, and at that point then we flipped over and we had a brief bit with BAC with Concorde and TSR2, and that quickly got smashed and crashed and the IP stolen. And now we've just got BAE. BAE is very, very vulnerable because the order books have been starved. The company is basically being sold short, and it's vulnerable to being wiped out in this unification process where it'll just go into the EU blob and then there won't be anything. So,
wasn't there a point, though, in the papers earlier on this year where even our civil servants under the tendering system within the EU, even they weren't prepared to put, was it the tanks to the UK to take part in the tendering services? They were actually going to exclude the UK, and this is our own government excluding our own suppliers.
Yeah, because, don't forget, it's not really our own government, because as we now know, it's busily been integrated into the EU for 70 odd years. So you can't look upon it like that. This is the problem. We've now got some anecdotal stuff coming in as of the last couple of days where ministers that were in DEXI were saying that they were basically locked out of their own office and couldn't operate because the whole of the office was like, it was insane. It was upside down. We're supposed to be exiting, but no, we're actually going further in, because obviously we know that the engine room in the cabinet office is set to integrate. Nobody's stopped the unintegrate setting. And this is the problem, is that the cabinet are not doing that. The Prime Minister is not doing that. The Prime Minister could do that with the cabinet. They could go and reset, that's a terrible word to use, but go into the cabinet office and say, no, all the settings that we had with this, all right, stop. We are now not integrating with the EU, and we've now got to re-engineer the offices and reappoint people, because obviously the appointees are all pro-EU. Well, sorry, that's not fair. The appointees are predominantly pro-EU. They're not all pro-EU. Sorry, I take that back. So this is the dilemma. So we've now got this anecdotal stuff, as I said, coming in from a minister saying he couldn't do it. Now, obviously, we can now say we're borne out by that, by David Davis and Steve Baker and all the others resigning, because they found it impossible. And we now see that the Chequers plan is now exactly the same as the Cameron papers before we had the Brexit campaign and vote, because it's the same stuff. Actually, we're now more EU, and it's actually a marriage, not a divorce, despite what they say, because the engine room in government, it's like the Borg, isn't it? It is we're going to assimilate. That's it. That there is no other. Somebody needs to get in there and deal with that, because otherwise, whatever we vote for or whatever referenda we have, you can have 10 referendums if you want, but at the moment that'll change nothing, because the whole thing, the boiler room there in the Cabinet Office, is set to integrate. But of course, it's not integrate, is it? That's a lovely sort of soft cover propaganda word for going into union. But there was never a mandate or constitutional capacity or ability for government to do that. But they said, we can integrate. Just imagine that conversation. Oh yeah, we can do that. That's all right.
So Dave, to wrap this up for now, because we're going to invite you back on to another show, and we're just going to have some short points for people to be able to share with other people, if that makes sense, to campaign with, to use as a campaign tool. To finish off, what would you say to the people who come on our show and who say that we are getting Brexit? And, I struggle here when I smile wryly when people talk about, oh, yes, we are getting Brexit. And I'll say, well, how are we getting Brexit? Are we just going to sort of almost like everything's going to change on the 1st of April 2019? How can it, when we have had our armed forces depleted of resources for so long? Why is it that we're signing these trade deals, which are supposedly so good for us? They're not really connected with the EU at all. Yes, they are. So what would you say to those sort of people who say, oh, yes, we're getting Brexit?
We're not getting Brexit at all. We're just getting more of the same propaganda. Miles, can you put slides 2 and 3 up? Just sort of a few seconds each, so people can freeze the screen if they want to replay. So slide 1 is General Sir James Everard, KCB, CBE, and he is saluting the EU anthem, "Ode to Joy," and that's this is very recently. This is in this sort of traction period that we've made over the last week or two with the paras out in Slovenia under EU. For EU military, in effect, under EU command, and he's saluting the EU anthem, and they're marching around. There's another film we've just got where they're all marching around with an EU flag. If you put slide 3 up, that's of a paratrooper wearing EU insignia, and this is what's caused all the stir now in Defence HQ in the MOD, because the cat's out the bag. So if anybody wants to look at what we're getting in Brexit, it's this. You can just see it. This is what we're getting in Brexit, and we're going to get, as the Germans have called for, if you want to rewind the film and look at the tweet from the German government, more.
Photo speaks 1,000 words. 1,000 really? Words.
Now let's just put everything into context here. From 1948. Regardless of government, whoever you voted for, whether you think you'll Remain or Brexit or whatever, Conservative, Liberal, Labour, made no difference whatsoever. And when we had the facade of this ridiculous nonsense in 72 with Heath going into the EEC, which was another pack of lies, obviously, in 74, 75, under the brilliant, this is going to be great, it's going to be wonderful. There's going to be a real great payoff. It's going to be so much better. So that was 72. In 74 and 75, the government at the time had to bring the IMF in to get a loan because we were broke. There was the payoff. If everybody didn't realise what was going on at that point, so many years on, what is the current status of the books of Her Majesty's government? I think I've got a quid around here somewhere. That would probably make me, personally, about £3 trillion richer than Her Majesty's government. That's the payoff. There is no payoff to this. It's just complete and utter annihilation. So in terms of the deal, this is another one of these super words that keeps being used. The deal. We're going to get the deal. Mrs. May is working on the deal and la, 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 la. The deal is military union. And that's the only thing that has been agreed during all of this recent time frame, immediately before Brexit, during Brexit and after Brexit. That's the only thing that has been agreed. Nothing else. Just that. So I'm going to submit it to you all that is the deal. And there is nothing else.
So it's not a case of to deal or not to deal. That is the question. The deals are being done, whatever the misinformation from mainstream media, whatever political parties of whatever size, nobody's talking about this at all. So really, we're reaching out to the people today and say, look, stop being controlled by your leaders. Please go and do your own research. Please think for yourselves. Don't rely on others. Your family's security is at stake. Nobody else is going to look after you. You are responsible for you and your family. Yeah. And at the end of the day, Dave, we've talked about organising another military campaign. We're basically drafting up a flyer which we hope that people will print off and distribute and discuss at future marches, future street stalls. Have you got any comments about that? We're finalising this at the minute.
This is exactly what we've got to do. We've got to, get this, get it together. And let me just reassure everyone, we've had a lot of success over the last couple of weeks. So let's not be downhearted. We've put a huge, capturing these tweets and these photos of our troops wearing the EU insignia on their arm here.
Yeah,
it's created a huge amount of traction. We've got Andrew Bridgen stood up in Parliament.
Yep.
With support and with pressure. And has questioned the minister. Didn't get a reply. Now I've seen that before from Wayne David with the missiles fiasco with the Royal Navy, not getting answer. I saw it again before with Andrew Rossingdale. I think before some time ago when he questioned Mark Lancaster about, there's rumours that all our army is going to be consumed into the EU army, and Mark Lancaster just sort of sheepishly went away. But the recent one with Bridgen proves the point. With specific focus from everyone, I think that the tweet has generated about 500,000 plus interactions now, and the amount of groundswell of response from everyone, because it's a very emotive subject here. We've all got a share in this. Everyone's had uncles, dads, grandparents involved with this thing. We've all got a share in the military in this country. Everyone, one way or another, you've got a share in it. You've had family that have been in this, and there's blood, and people will see through all this nonsense, and they'll see that, but go, no, we're not having that. And it's put enough pressure in there for MPs to start doing their job. Andrea Jenkins is another good example. She's now getting up and talking about it. And what we've got to do, regardless of whether they're Labour or Tory or whatever, forget that. If somebody's going to get up and challenge this, get behind them. Believe you me, it's the only way this is going to work. You might not want, you might not like these people. Forget that. If they're going to, we've proved a point there with Andrew Bridgen. With enough pressure, he got up and he did his job. And we've got to do more of that. Because otherwise, believe you me, this thing's on rails. It'll happen if it's not stopped. And the only thing that's going to stop it is those MPs standing up in Parliament, challenging the ministers, and the ministers going, oh, God, we better do something. Because believe you me, this has happened at the MOD over the last couple of weeks with this insignia on the armbands. And they're now fighting a rearguard action because the game's up. And of course, our next phase, Caroline, as we've already discussed, we're going to go back to a lot of these MPs and go, you told us this wasn't going to happen. But it did. And it has.
Well, Dave,
what's going on?
I know. Well, so basically we're going to kick arse now, and we are going to go back to those MPs, all those MPs who use the standard establishment template letter, trying to dismiss us and belittle us. We're going to take back control. Dave, it's been a pleasure to speak to you again today, and look forward to working with you on the next campaign.
Likewise.
And to the people at home, thank you so much for joining in and listening. And perhaps some of you have made some comments on Facebook. Please watch this space. We are going to set up a campaign, and we'll be doing another YouTube video very shortly to explain how you at home can get involved. Thank you for listening. Again, please join us on a Stepping Stones to Awareness show sometime soon. Goodbye.